begin with a few comments before we start the webinar. So good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Josh Barrett. I'm an assistant professor with Memorial University in Newfoundland, and I'm also past president of the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. And today, happy to be joined by Dr. Ryan Gibson of the University of Guelph, and he'll provide a few comments about himself in a few moments, who was also past president of CRRF once upon a time. Prior to jumping in, I did want to know I'm currently located in Conception Bay, South Newfoundland, Labrador, which is the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. And while we probably don't have time to do a verbal roundtable this morning, I would encourage folks, if they wanted to introduce themselves and where they're situated in the chat, by all means, we'd be happy to see that as well. So looking at our attendance list today, I see a few folks that I know that are well acquainted with the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation, or CRRF for short, as we like to call it, and some folks that may be unfamiliar with the organization. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, CRRF was established in 1989 to provide a collaborative forum for rural research amongst rural leaders, communities, researchers, students, and all levels of government. And in many respects, we often act as a knowledge broker between researchers, governments, and communities. And so if you're here today, you're probably interested in enhancing the lives of rural Canadians. And if so, you'll fit right into this network, into our session today. Maybe you're here because you are subscribed to our newsletter. And if you're not familiar with the newsletter, CRRF issues a monthly newsletter that contains all things about rural research, events, opportunities, conferences, workshops, job postings, new publications, and lots of other types of information. And so if you're not subscribed to our newsletter, but you would like to, please feel free to comment. And we have your email because you joined us today, and we can certainly get you on that list. One of the big parts about CRRF that we pride ourselves on is being an advocate for rural Canada by disseminating relevant rural research, which may impact public policy. And in fact, that's one of the big reasons why we're doing our webinar today. And one of the ways in which we do this is by issuing a State of Rural Canada every 2 to 3 years. The most recent copy of the State of Rural Canada was released in 2024, and I can provide a link to the chat, but it provides many relevant details in each province and territory in Canada. And stay tuned in 2026, as we'll be looking for folks, and maybe yourself, that would be interested in contributing to our next State of Rural Canada event. So publication rather. And so if that's something that you'd be interested in, please do stay tuned, and we'd be happy to get you engaged. And one of the last things about CRRF that I wanted to quickly plug is that we are, as a network, we certainly try to meet annually at our conference, and next year that's taking place in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, Labrador, from June 16th to the 19th, in partnership with the North Atlantic Forum, Memorial University of Newfoundland's Grenfell campus, and as well as partnering with several Indigenous organizations. So you're all invited if you haven't heard so already, and I'll also provide a link in the chat in case you're looking for some additional information. And if you have any questions about anything that I've chatted about thus far, please feel free to reach out to myself or Ryan. And without further ado, perhaps some context about why we're meeting today. One of the highlights of our conferences is we like to host a new researchers forum, with the most recent event occurring in Brandon, Manitoba this past September. And this always provides an opportunity to work collaboratively with new and emerging researchers, people interested in rural Canada, and provide some learning opportunities for folks. And the CRRF board decided that we'd like to continue doing that in between conferences to try and keep up that training and capacity building. And happy that you were able to join us today as we embark on that at the end of 2025 and 2026 into the new year. And so today we'll be leading our first one. Ryan is here chatting about knowledge mobilization, and also happy to note that because of your participation today, we'll also be circulating a certificate of your completion. So please stay tuned to your inbox tomorrow as we circulate that to folks. And so I'll pass it over to Ryan, who will speak for about 30 to 35 moments. I'll try to monitor. We will have a Q&A at the end, but I'll be monitoring the comments and the technology in the interim. So without further ado, Ryan, I'll pass it over to you. Thank you.
Great. And before you disappear, Josh, can you make sure that can you let me know if you can see the screen and hear me okay?
Loud and clear, visibly looking great.
Excellent. Well, perfect. Thanks to everyone for taking the time out of your schedules to join. Good morning if you're in the West. Good afternoon if you happen to be in the East on this side of things. This afternoon, what we're going to chat about is around knowledge mobilization to really empower rural, island, and northern communities, regardless of where they're located and regardless of the situations that they find themselves in, and wanting to take the opportunity to reflect on some knowledge that we've gained through the foundation, but also through some research that I think is really quite useful to think about, to digest, and to integrate into our own actions, whether you be in local government, whether you're in provincial, federal, territorial governments, if you're in the private sector, or in post-secondary education or community-based organizations. What we're going to do this morning, first off, building on Josh's comments, I want to recognize that I'm here in the city of Guelph in southern Ontario, and want to recognize that we're all on different traditional territories across the country. Here in Guelph, I'd like to acknowledge the Adirondack people, whose traditional territory the university resides, and offer our respect to the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis neighbors as we strive to strengthen this relationship with them. Whether you're here in Guelph or joining online elsewhere in the country, I encourage you to reflect on the relationships with the land, with Indigenous peoples, and the important outstanding work on reconciliation that is still needed. These are big and sometimes difficult discussions, but they're thoroughly needed throughout our work, and hopefully this is one of many things that contributes towards that. What I'm hoping we'll do over the next 25 to 30 minutes is we're going to start from this perspective that we have a knowledge paradox taking place right now that impacts rural, northern, and island communities. We've got more information than we've ever had, but yet we've got challenges in using it and making evidence-based decisions. From that starting point, I then want to share with you the crux of this afternoon's webinar around some recent knowledge mobilization initiatives that both the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation and the North Atlantic Forum have been engaged in. And as I said, there'll be lots of opportunities for discussion, questions, and anything along that front. A few housekeeping things before I dive in. If you get disconnected from the Zoom platform, I offer my sincerest apologies. I'm going to assume it's a gremlin in the system, but please simply just rejoin with the same hyperlink that you used to get in, and we'll get you re-caught up. You're welcome to have your video on throughout the seminar or the webinar. You're welcome to turn it off. It makes absolutely no difference. But we will ask everyone just to bite their microphones unless they're talking to alleviate any unnecessary background noises for everyone. As was mentioned at the very onset, we will record the webinar and post it to CRRF's YouTube and website online. So feel free to share anything you would like, but if you would not like to share information that is not in the public domain, encourage you not to do so as it would be recorded. And also just to let everyone know that a copy of the slides and all of the resources that were mentioned by Josh and that I'll mention, we'll send to everyone at the conclusion of the presentation. So don't feel as if you need to frantically try to write things down on that side of things. We'll send out the slide deck and some information to everyone so that people have that available. And you're welcome to share that with other folks as well. If you have colleagues that would also benefit from having this information, please feel free to share it. But before we get diving in, I wanted to ask people a few quick questions. So if you've got a tablet, a phone, a computer, you might go to the website slido.com, or you can use the QR code that's presented on your screen here. If you get into Slido, it will ask for a number and a code. You can find those on the screen right now. They will also appear on the next 2 or 3 screens, so don't panic if I hit the next button and it disappears. But these are just a few background questions to better get a sense of who's in the room today, where people are, and the multiple hats that maybe they're wearing. So the first question that I have for folks, if you're able to log online and do it through Slido. It's just where you happen to be in the country at the moment. All of the provinces and territories should be listed there. If you're from outside of the provinces and territories of Canada, feel free to select other. But wonderful to see that we've got a good group of people joining from literally coast to coast to coast, as it looks like here on the screen, on that front. If you're not able to access the Slido information, no worries whatsoever. You're welcome at any point to include that information in the chat box if you'd like to share and you're not able to join on Slido. So warm welcome to everyone from across the country. Um, I'm curious about people's familiarity with surf. So I was wondering if you could just check any of these that you've maybe done in the past. Attended a surf conference, maybe you've attended a new researcher forum event, you've received the newsletter, you're aware of some of the reports, maybe you've seen surf on social media, maybe you've never had any engagement with surf before, and that's absolutely fine. But we're just curious, where has people's engagement been with surf on this front, as the foundation has been around since 1989? But in various corners, it may be more familiar than in other corners of the country and in people's different types of work. So this is wonderful to see that many people are receiving the newsletter, they're familiar with the website and social media, and then lower on the other activities. And hopefully for that 50% that have never been to a surf conference before, perhaps we can get you to Corner Brook in Newfoundland and Labrador for June 2026 for the upcoming event there. And finally, my last question for folks is, which of the following affiliations kind of best describes your work? And I fully anticipate that everybody on the call has 5, 6, or even 20 hats that they wear, but you might just simply select the one that you think best represents you today in your engagement. Lovely. So we've got lots of folks from post-secondary institutions, whether staff, students, faculty, some folks from various different governments and nonprofit organizations, which is wonderful. And I think speaks to that reality that you'll find in the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation of an incredibly wide, diverse mix of voices that are in attendance. So maybe I can turn now to the topic at hand and this notion of knowledge mobilization for rural communities. And I think it's really important to recognize that rural, island, and northern communities are confronted with an unprecedented volume of knowledge. There's digital flows of information, open access, new reports being generated at universities and colleges by the private sector and by communities and nonprofit organizations themselves. We have more knowledge resources than probably ever before at our hands. But at the same time, we know that, or what would be ideal is that this increased knowledge would support stronger rural futures, evidence-based decision making, and really helping to facilitate local priorities. But this unprecedented volume of knowledge has not, however, translated into equitable access. And I'm sure we've all got multiple experiences of this. The experiences of rural communities illuminates this paradox that although we have increased knowledge, the access to knowledge remains unequal, it remains inconsistent, and for some communities, it's actually absent. And so this paradox emerges from multiple interrelated disconnects. Sometimes it's around language and the technical wording of knowledge, and it's not easily accessible by those that wish to use it. Sometimes the knowledge is behind paywalls or restricted, only certain people get access to it. We have connectivity gaps that exist in terms of broadband connectivity to be able to access information. We have human resource limitations that just the amount of time it would take to find information and to synthesize it, digest it, to be able to use it in our day to day. We have misalignments between the research that's being created and what maybe communities and rural practitioners need to move forward. And we often have this misconception that knowledge is created by post-secondary institutions and that they are the only creators of knowledge. But in fact, we know that there are incredible knowledge creators that reside in communities, organizations, private sector, and the list goes on and on and on. So we do have these multiple disconnects that exist. We've got this paradigm, or we've got this, excuse me, paradox of more knowledge, but sometimes less access, uneven and inconsistent. Which brings us to this notion of knowledge mobilization and this need to build bridges between where knowledge is created and where knowledge needs to be used. And there's lots of different ways to do this. And in some disciplines, they've been much more proactive about doing this. Um, we could look to things like medical and health sciences have been a bit more proactive on this, but we need these metaphorical bridges so that people can find information, they can understand the information, and they can use it when it's appropriate to influence their local practice. So, in partnership with the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation, we've been exploring, implementing, and evaluating various bridges to facilitate knowledge sharing to ensure that rural practitioners, local governments, senior levels of government, other researchers, private sector have access to information. And this afternoon, I wanted to share two initiatives that we've been working on to pull out and distill some of the key lessons learned, those pearls of wisdom that we've gathered through the process, but also welcome any ideas, thoughts, and comments around these initiatives as it moves forward. This is by no means to say these are the only two tools for knowledge mobilization. There are thousands of different tools and approaches that can be used, and it all depends on the local context and the audience around which might be the best. So by no means don't walk away thinking these are the only two tools that are out there or that these are necessarily the best tools at the end of the day. So the first one that I wanted to share with everyone was around some plain language summaries that were created. And the dilemma that we encountered, and there are some folks that I see on the call that were at the event, in 2024, the North Atlantic Forum, which is a collegial assembly of community leaders, governments, researchers, private businesses, and nonprofits, came together in Letterfrack, Ireland, to showcase leading rural development around how we build sustainable, vibrant rural communities. And really incredible information was shared at this conference, but unfortunately, not everyone could attend. Not all communities could get to Western Ireland. Not all governments were able to travel. And as a result, we ended up with this inequity that some people had access to the information that emerged, but not everyone did. So one of the solutions that we generated was the opportunity to create a series of plain language research summaries that were based on the presentations that were shared at the conference that would then be shared in a more wide audience after the conference to ensure that more people were able to access the information, but also to access it in an accessible manner. So what we did was we worked with 6 graduate students from the University of Prince Edward Island, Grenfell campus at Memorial University, and the University of Guelph to draft a series of 7 plain language summaries. Each of the summaries focused on one single presentation that was delivered at the conference, and the graduate students did a workshop and some knowledge acquisition around how to write plain language summaries, how to ensure that the message is clear and concise. And they created a first draft of that plain language summary and circulated it back to the original presenter, the person who delivered the presentation at the conference in Ireland. In collaboration with that presenter, they were able to refine their plain language summary to ensure that they had not misrepresented the information and that it was clear with the resources that would allow people to better understand it. And the second phase of that draft's plain language summary was to hold a series of workshops with rural development practitioners, staff from various levels of government, and researchers, where we could kind of metaphorically put our boots to the draft summaries to kick them around to make sure that the message that they were presenting was clear, to make sure that people understood the ideas that were being presented, that we had accuracy in the information, but also around what the impact of that story would be in that summary so that it could be utilized by the people who received the information. And these two activities were really quite critical. A, connecting to the original presenters, and B, workshopping it to make sure that we had the right tone, the right information, the right material, and presented in the right way. Once these were created, we finalized these research summaries and we circulated them as far and as wide as we could possibly get. We sent the research summaries, posting them online, so if people were to do a Google search, they would come across them. We published them on multiple social media platforms through Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. We also included them in multiple newsletters. So if you received The SURF newsletter, you probably saw a few promotional pieces on this, but if you receive lots of rural development newsletters, you might have seen them in multiple newsletters from multiple organizations. And we also circulated these throughout rural development organizations and encouraged them to send them to their members or to promote them to their members in whichever format they thought was the most useful. So at the end of the day, we did create 7 plain language summaries, and I apologize that all 7 on the screen are probably too small to read any individual one of them, but there is a QR code that is listed in the bottom right-hand corner. But we had a lovely case study that was done on solar projects in Nunatukkavut in Labrador. We had a lovely summary that was done around food insecurity and the challenges that were being faced by Mi'kmaq communities in Western Newfoundland. We had another summary done on heritage tourism and local livelihoods from Western Ireland. We had another one looking at housing development challenges in rural Ireland and the solutions that have emerged. Another one about navigating rural economic development in the island, in an island context, in the Magdalen Islands here in Canada. We had another plain language summary that was developed out of the St. Anthony Resource Basin Incorporated initiatives in the Northern Peninsula of Newfoundland and Labrador. And finally, we had a plain language summary created around the role of entrepreneurism in rural economic development. So each of these 7 were created by a graduate student in consultation with the original presenter of the workshops. And then we workshop these with practitioners from rural communities, policy, government staff from all levels, as well as researchers. So one of the things I wanted to highlight here, and this is just the one that Eliza McLaughlin did out of the University of Prince Edward Island, based on a presentation by Ryan Lash, who is from the University of Notre Dame, around heritage tourism and local livelihoods in Inishbofin, in an island on Western Newfoundland. We designed the summaries in collaboration with practitioners and government staff, and you can see there the format of them all looks the same. We were told very clearly that 1 page was the maximum amount of kind of metaphorical real estate that people would pay attention to on that front. They also informed us that bullet points were quite critical. They didn't want to read paragraphs upon paragraphs upon paragraphs. They wanted quick, easy access to information. They wanted a couple of hyperlinks where they could find additional information, follow-up resources, and they wanted a catchy image that would be at the top of the document, A, to catch their attention, but also B, a really lovely story that came out of one of the evaluations, that they want to be able to find it on their desk or on their bookshelf quickly. In the myriad of papers that might be collecting there, they wanted to be able to find these sorts of things in a quick manner. And the other thing that we did with all of the plain language or the research summaries out of the North Atlantic Forum was we ensured that they were accessible. So they are all compliant with the Act for Ontario Disabilities, Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which is also corresponds to most other provincial and territorial accessibility acts across the country. So this ensures that if anyone was using them through a screen reader or other assisted technologies, that the information would still be presented in a clear and concise manner. But you can see here, all of the 7 summaries have kind of the same format, those key messages with 3 to 5 bullets, and what are the impacts for rural communities that can be explored. One of the really interesting things that I discovered around this process, we've been doing a series of workshops with practitioners, governments, and researchers to find out how useful these have been. But one for me that was a really telling moment was I attended a meeting in downtown Toronto with representatives from the province of Ontario. And at the meeting, the person sitting beside me handed me one of the plain language summaries and said, have you come across these? These are a really cool resource that I received at a previous meeting. Are you familiar with these? And I thought that was a wonderful moment of kind of going full circle, that the information was coming back to those that had started. But I've got 5 key lessons that we learned, or pearls of wisdom, I might call them. One is that we heard loud and clear that rural practitioners don't have extensive time to find or digest rural research. They often are moving from topic to topic. They need to locate information very quickly because they don't have a large window to search and to utilize that information. So they need to find it quickly, and they need to be able to digest it, to be able to synthesize it and to find the meaning of it in a quick manner. We found that the summaries caught people's attention. They caught people's attention on social media. They got people's attention in organizations. We had a number of individuals who ended up reaching out for follow-up information because they wanted to learn more about the activity or the knowledge that was being shared. And we also saw really unanticipated outcomes of rural newspapers across the country saying, can we profile these in a local newspaper because we've got space and we'd love to share these stories. And that's not something that we had intended to do, but just emerged naturally, demonstrating that there was value in these documents. We also learned that there was an incredible resource of existing networks and organizations to circulate this information. We didn't need to create a new email listserv to get the information out. We tapped into organizations across Canada and across Europe to really help us mobilize and amplify the message to ensure that it got out to people across the country on this front. So this included groups like the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation, the Institute of Island Studies, the Rural Development Institute at Brandon University. This included many of the municipal, provincial, and territorial umbrella organizations. This included groups like Community Futures, development corporations. This included organizations in provincial and federal governments that were sharing it through their own internal platforms. And that was an incredible resource that we were able to get this message out to a much larger audience in a much more timely and efficient manner. One of the other things that we learned through our workshops and evaluation afterwards, but particularly those workshops when we were trying to ensure that we have the right message, was that language matters critically. And it was incredible the number of times that we would think we got it perfect before somebody would innocently say, I don't know what that means. And everyone would have to pause and take 2 steps back and say, ah, yes. That language is incredibly unique to a certain geography across the country. That's a unique language to the Magdalen Islands. Therefore, we need to think about how do we ensure we can convey this to folks that are not familiar with that language. Or it was incredibly rooted in culture, history of a place that we needed to be able to convey to the reader that maybe if they were not familiar with Nunatukovut, they wouldn't understand some of the dynamics at play. And so language mattered, and it was a wonderful opportunity and process to be able to go back through these on a regular basis with different lenses, we might say, to make sure that we got the right information, the right language, and that it was interpreted in the same way by all users. And the last thing that we heard loud and clear from the students that participated in this initiative was that plain language summaries and the skill set that goes around creating them is not something that's regularly taught. Most people don't have exposure around how to do this well, the process, lessons learned along the way. And so a few resources that we created through this initiative that you'll get in an email just after our webinar, we did a webinar just around how to create these, inviting some experts from the field to share their insights. We did regular workshops. We created a few tools and resources to just help people think about some of these questions that we learned along the way so that maybe others don't have to reinvent the wheel on that front. I'm going to now flip to the second initiative that we were that's still actually currently going on. The research summaries of the North Atlantic Forum happened in 2024. This is an initiative called Connecting the Dots. It's funded through the Ontario Agri-Food Innovation Alliance and is done in partnership with the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation, the Ontario Professional Planners Institute, and the Rural Ontario Institute here in Ontario. And one of the dilemmas that we discovered very early on is that the University of Guelph and all of their partners create an incredible amount of rural knowledge. But if you've ever been to the University of Guelph's webpage, you'd be very challenged to find that knowledge because it's in different pages across the entirety of the university. So what we sought out to do was to create a series of short videos to promote existing rural research that could be mobilized through social media, through newsletters, and other platforms to really bring more attention to the research that's already being done. So much like the research summaries, from the North Atlantic Forum, we didn't want to create any new research. We just wanted to mobilize the knowledge that we already had. So for the past year, we've been creating videos on research outputs. This could be a publication that was published in a journal. This could be a presentation that was delivered at a conference. This could be a student's major research paper or thesis. This could also be a community-based organization that has generated new knowledge that they want to share as well. So it doesn't solely have to be from the University of Guelph. I've had the delight of working with a team of four incredible people who have helped us to identify some of these different research outputs, to work with researchers, other students, and community organizations to create these videos. So we usually take a document that has been created. It often is lengthy, and we distill it down into about a 30 to 60-second video. Um, the video is drafted by our team, and then we go back to all of the original participants, the original authors of those reports and research outputs, to make sure that we've captured it accurately, to make sure that we have not misrepresented it, to make sure that we don't have an image in the background that is inappropriate for the geography or the topic that's being pursued on that front. And as I said, the videos are usually very short, under 60 seconds in length, because the research indicates that on social media, the amount of time that you will spend looking at a video before flipping or sliding on your phone or your tablet is about 20 seconds. And so we wanted to make sure that we could catch people's attention in a quick way on this front. We've got three videos that are out at the moment, one on farmland preservation and urban expansion here in Southern Ontario. We have another one on farmer knowledge as formal knowledge in Ontario, and a third one on economic mobility that's taken place. And I'll show you the first one there on farmland preservation in 2 seconds. We post all of these short videos to YouTube, and then we share them over social media, left, right, and center to anyone that will help us on that side of things. These videos go out and get recirculated, and it find homes in all sorts of really cool places. Um, We've also started sending out newsletters as well to promote the videos and the summaries that are accompanying them. These newsletter articles we often write a small newsletter blurb and send it out to organizations. There are about 23 organizations across Ontario and Canada at the moment that are so far being very receptive to including the newsletter article, the video in their newsletters so that it goes out to their members. You can find all three of the videos at that QR code that's listed here at the bottom of your screen, but I'm hoping with the permission of the technology deities that might be looking down on us, you'll be able to both see and hear this video on farmland preservation here in Ontario. I'm I'm hoping everyone else is in the same dilemma that I am. You see a tractor, but no video.
That's correct, yes.
Let me see if there is. My apologies. As is always the case, we had it up and running just before everyone joined us, but the technology seems to be wanting to throw us for a bit of a loop there. So just give me 2 seconds here. I'm going to pull it up on a different platform and allow this to be shared with everybody. So I believe, oh, my apologies. I need to stop that so that you have sound as well. That would be lovely. Now I'm hoping we have a different outcome now.
How do we prevent Ontario's most valuable asset from disappearing? Researchers studied policies to protect this vital resource. Here's what they found. Central Ontario is losing prime agricultural land. The Greenbelt Plan helps protect farmland, and understanding farmland loss at all levels is crucial. Visit rural.uoguelph.ca or scan the QR code to learn more.
So as you can see, a very short video. It's not anticipated to give everyone the full breadth of what was being shared in the original research, because that would be very impossible to do in a short time period. But gives people a kind of a snapshot of what's there, and allows them some hyperlinks to go back to the information if they wanted to get more details, if they wanted to learn more about it, or to contact the original authors that were involved in that particular research project. I should also have mentioned that that one was a research paper that emerged in a published journal. The second one that I presented around farmer knowledge was actually led by a farming association here in Southern Ontario. And the third one emerges based on a report that was done on economic mobility with colleagues across Canada that will officially be published in January 2026. But this initiative is still ongoing, as I mentioned. We'll continue for another few months. We've got, I think, another about 8 to 10 videos that'll be coming out over the next 3 months. But what we've discovered is that videos catch more attention than text-based promotions of knowledge. And so that ability to have that video has created a much greater attraction for people on social media getting to the videos. We've also discovered the prepackaged newsletter articles are very well received. We've yet to find an organization that has told us they will not publish the story. Usually it's about 100 words, and the video. So they've been very much well received on that front. One of the other things we've learned is that the process of creating these videos is much more time intensive than we anticipated. Part of that is around just simply wanting to be collaborative and engaging people on that front. So when the draft videos are created, we send them out to the original authors first and foremost. After they've given their thumbs up to it, we then send it out to a panel of practitioners, of planners, of researchers, of local organizations to give their insights on it. And then once that has been finalized, we send it out. But that process for collaboration and that engagement is incredibly time consuming and can sometimes feel like herding cats, as everyone has lots of things they've got on the go, and trying to get everyone's comments and insights has been more time consuming than we anticipated. But the other piece on this one is we're still learning. This initiative is still very much in its infancy. We've got a few more coming out. If you're listening in and think, that would be lovely to get that prepackaged newsletter article into a newsletter that you manage, please let me know. We're happy to get it out to you on that front, as are we still figuring out what is the sweet spot for videos in terms of timing, the use of QR codes. Are there certain social media platforms that are more receptive to this than others? I can tell you that our experience with Twitter, for example, has been that it was quite popular and quite active about a year ago. Today, we get almost very little traction on Twitter other than a few institutional accounts. The most of our traction tends to be through LinkedIn on that front. There's some engagement on Facebook and other media platforms, but I'd say 85 to 90% of all the traction of the videos and the messaging is coming through LinkedIn, and the ability to repost it through various different networks, different organizations on that side of things. But we're very much still learning on this side of things, and welcome any ideas or suggestions that folks might have. I wanted to share a few things in case they weren't familiar with you. These are other knowledge mobilization activities that CRRF has been engaged in over the last few years. One that's been happening more recently is what's called the Proceedings of the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation Conference, building on that same dilemma that we heard with the research summaries of the North Atlantic Forum, was how do we get presentations that were delivered at the CRRF conferences to a much wider audience? And in partnership with the University of Guelph's library, we've been able to create an online repository where presentations can be posted. So anybody that presents at the conference, whether it's a panel, a presentation, a poster, or a video, are invited to share their information into this proceedings. And so the proceedings now is electronically available from 2015 through to 2025. It is indexed so that if you do a Google search for it, it should come up on that side of things, which helps to connect people to that knowledge. You can see the QR code there that's on the screen. It will link you directly into the proceedings on that front, and you're welcome to look for all the various cool things that have been shared, or perhaps your own things that that you've maybe shared in past years on that front. As Josh mentioned at the get-go, there is a State of Rural Canada report that was created initially in 2015 and has been continued about every 2 or 3 years since then. And this is an incredible source of information. Each of the years has a slightly different theme to it. And as Josh mentioned, there will be an upcoming State of Rural Canada. And if you're interested in participating, please do reach out to Josh or other members of the board of directors that are on the call. They'd be more than happy to tell you a bit more about it and to help get you connected to those that are leading it. There also is the CRRF newsletter. Many people say that this appears in their inbox. I put in the most recent one there. John Dale is online. John has been coordinating the CRRF newsletter for the last while. And so if you've got stories that you would like to get into the newsletter, please send John a note on this front. You can also see past newsletters on the webpage or sign up to receive the newsletter if you don't get it. Or if you've got family, friends that you think a wonderful Christmas present this year would be the gift of the CRRF newsletter, you can stick their name and email address into that and we'll get them the registered newsletter on that front. And another one that has been, this is more historic, it's not a current initiative, but is the Rural Roots podcast series. This series was created in partnership with the Harris Center for Regional Policy and Development at Memorial University and CRRF. And over 3 years, it created 42 podcast episodes that focus on different themes of rural development. This includes themes around food production, the textile industries, agriculture, knowledge mobilization, you name it. And all of the episodes typically follow a format where there is community voices, there are researcher voices, and there are policy voices. And so if you've not heard the podcast series before, wonderful thing to download onto your device. And as you're riding the bus, walking the dog, or whatever you're doing, you can take a listen to that particular series. But these are other ways that knowledge mobilization is happening in CRRF. And maybe the last thing I'll share before I turn off my screen and open it up to any discussions, and people are welcome to add comments, questions, or other experiences into the chat box, or you can unmute your microphone, is the the 2026 upcoming conference, which will be hosted by the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation in partnership with the North Atlantic Forum. It'll take place in Corner Brook, Newfoundland and Labrador from June 16th to 19th. The event has a call for contributions and stories that's open at the moment. So if you would like to share a story from your community, whether it be rural economic development, immigration, whether it is partnerships and collaboration, whether it is food security, whether it is climate change, or any of the above, you're welcome to do so. The deadline is the 31st of January, so it's not today or tomorrow. You've still got a bit of time. And there's also an invitation that if you are heading out to Corner Brook for the CRRF NAF conference, there will be a joint event that's happening just after that's hosted by the Canadian Centre for Rural Creativity in partnership with community organizers in Norris Point and Flat Bay, where they'll be doing a shore-to-shore conference, very much embedded in community, looking at the role of culture, heritage, as it relates to rural development and island development. So if you'd like to come for one or both, you're welcome to do so. The registration will open in the new year, but the call for contributions closes at the end of January on that front. And again, that QR code will get you more information, but you'll get the slides and all of these hyperlinks in an email immediately after we hang up today. So I'm maybe going to leave it at that. Happy to answer any questions or defer them to others that are here. Happy to hear of other experiences that people have along the way. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take a glass of water here.
Well, thank you, Ryan, for that very informative discussion on all things knowledge mobilization, particularly with respect to getting rural research out to practitioners, policymakers, and the like. Really appreciate your time. As I noted in the comments, we do have about 15 minutes left for questions. And so if folks wanted to provide an oral question, by all means, you can use the hand raise function and I can get to you that way. Or if you would prefer to provide a comment online, that's perfect. I can get that out to you as well. I see we have some starting to come in, but while the Thoughts continue to percolate. I will ask my own, Ryan, as folks get some of their own thoughts together. I'm aware a bit about these knowledge mobilization plain language summaries. My apologies that you had chatted about, and coming full circle, having been on the receiving end of some of the products that you put forward. I believe you also have them on your website, and you're able to track how many downloads and how far of a reach. Did you want to share anything about how far of a reach some of that information got?
Yeah, so it's been really fascinating. It's always interesting when you put information out and you think, I hope people use it. But then you're never really sure who uses it. So when people are downloading from the webpage, we are able to track that. For the North Atlantic Forum research summaries, we were getting around 100 downloads of each every month, which was a wonderful piece of information. We also were able to see the geographical scope. About 70% of those downloads were happening in Canada across different locations, but 30% were outside of Canada, which was fascinating. About half of that was coming from Ireland, which is perhaps not surprising as that's where the conference was located. But we were also seeing people downloading information regularly from China, from Indonesia, from Ghana and Nigeria, from Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. And so that was reaching much farther geographies than I had ever anticipated or ever envisioned, which is lovely. And then we also have just those anecdotal pieces of information where I think I shared the story of sitting at a meeting and someone hands it to you saying, have you ever seen this before? On that front. But it's also lovely to start seeing it in different forums where we start to see these summaries sitting on people's desks in legislatures and in parliaments or in decision makers' hands. So it's been really interesting to see that. But it's always, I think, an underrepresentation because the web pages never capture everybody correctly, or it might have their IP addresses slightly incorrect. So we have some information, but not necessarily the true impact of it.
It's great and interesting outcome for sure. Thanks for that. There's one question that came in online from Jess. We'll start with Jess. I'm curious about any impacts of AI on these great knowledge mobilization initiatives while creating these summaries and videos. Did you notice or experience any advantages, challenges, or harm from the use of AI?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jess. And so when we created the research summaries, we didn't extensively use AI for the North Atlantic Forum. We simply used a human component, for lack of a better terminology, to generate that. Um, With the videos, we have used AI in a couple of different ways. One is around narration. And so trying to use AI platforms to narrate, we've had a wonderful hiccup. One of the things that we struggled with the most actually was getting the pronunciation of Guelph correctly. As you can imagine, the AI narration out there didn't know what to do with the word Guelph, and it would create some real doozies of a pronunciation. So we had to trick AI into how to say Guelph by writing G hyphen elf. And they eventually were able to get it on board. Um, so from that perspective, we've used a little bit of AI in the videos. We didn't use it in the research summaries to date. But what's really interesting, and if folks have an interest in this, I'd love to chat more offline via email, or we can have another conversation. But we've also just received a new research grant to look at the role of AI in creating plain language summaries. And so we'll be starting that actually at the Corner Brook conference, where we're going to be doing two things. One is around testing. Can AI generate research summaries from simply presentations or reports in an effective manner versus kind of that human created and crafted reports? And so we'll be having a panel of people that can find out how to use them, when to use them, what's the preferred method, and where there might be holes or deficiencies. But we're just getting our feet underneath that project, and we'll be launching it in the new year. So stay tuned. Happy to chat with anyone if they have more questions about it, though.
Perfect. Thanks for that, both of you. Couple more coming in. We have one from Milad. Great work, especially transforming the summaries to videos. I'm curious if you got any feedback from the format of the videos. Is it affecting positively?
Yeah, so I think Well, there's two answers. One is the initial feedback seems positive. People are excited to see their research in a video format. One of the challenges we have is that researchers or knowledge creators are often wanting a longer video because their 20-page journal article or 100-page report is chock full of information, but we can't get it all in a video. And so we often have to negotiate how to make the video manageable in terms of time, that kind of 30 to 40 seconds as the sweet spot. Um, and so that's been something we're still experimenting with. We're also still experimenting just to see if these videos that are currently out resonate for all of our users. Do economic development officers think about them differently than elected officials, or do people in Western Canada see them differently than Eastern Canada? And so we're still very much trying to experiment and to figure all of that out. So stay tuned for more information. We'll be sure to share that with folks.
Perfect. Thanks for that. We have one here from John. When we think about information sharing from community organizations, government, and practitioners, is there any central repository that exists as a catch-all in the world of rural here in Canada for easy access, or is there a bit of a gap there?
There's not a little gap there, there's a giant gap there. So there is no single repository where information is found. There are many repositories, and often the repositories are thematically focused or time focused or are geographically focused, but there is no single repository out there. That would be just wonderful that would to have one kind of touchstone point where people could just find information. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist at the moment. And it would be lovely if it did. And I know there's others on the call that have been kind of thinking about this and what it could look like, how it could be done, and where it might sit, because we do have a huge dilemma that, and we hear it from people all the time, that they don't know where to even look for the research because they just don't know where it is. And even if they know where they think it should be, for example, if they think it should be at the University of Guelph, which department would it be listed under? Is it under a faculty member's page? Is it under a department page? It's an incredibly exhausting experience. And so I think the more that we can do central depositories, or at least also perhaps an alternative is pathfinders between depositories, will be an incredible resource. But we're not there yet, unfortunately.
Might skip over the next one just to see if Nelson, if you had anything else to add on this, or is that okay for now?
Yeah, I'd like to add. I've been involved in rural research since the early '90s. I think I'm the old guy on the list here. I've known some of you since you were young students, and I live in the world of being connected both to the producers of rural research and the consumers of rural research. And what I find in the consumers of rural research is they need just-in-time answers to specific questions. So the last 15 years, I've been working mainly as a consultant, mostly in rural data, not production of data, but distribution and use of data. And I get these sometimes panic calls about I need from a CAO of a small municipality or a CEO of an NGO, and I need to know by next month what's the research say about rural school closures or emergency services in remote communities or something, help. And um and I'm happy to do that. And you know, I tried to explain to somebody much younger than myself, I have this Rolodex in the back of my head about who knows what. And they're saying, so what's a Rolodex? Anyway, at this stage of my career, I'm trying to be the unconsultant. If I'm useful, people who call me should need consultants less. Uh, so this follows up with John's question. Is there a place that I could step back and just say, great question. There are people who know a lot about what you're asking, and just go to this link or whatever. And uh, this is a much bigger discussion than we have time for today. But If somebody wants to buy me a coffee or something in Newfoundland, uh, let's try and hash this out. And over the next few months, um, let's see if we can find a better way of doing this. And um, anyway, there's
It's a great comment, Ryan.
I've said my piece. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great comment, Nelson, on this front. I stuck into the chat box one opportunity. It's not necessarily the be all and end all, but I think it's a opportunity that people may or may not be familiar with, which is Surf created an Ask an Expert page that allowed people to do kind of, as you said, Nelson, stick in that question and kind of put it out to the Surfs. When Surf receives those, they typically send it out to people that might know the answer, or sometimes it's sent to a big group that says, "Does anyone know who might know the answer?" With the hope of that coming in, because you're right, those windows are short. If you get a month, it's a giant window, but sometimes they're measured in hours. The amount of time that you have to be able to stick information into that window before it closes, which is incredibly difficult to operate in.
Thanks to you both. I am cognizant of time, and so as a good segue, if there's any questions after this, please either use that function or contact myself or Ryan directly, and we'll get through the last 2 to 3 questions here in the chat. From Cindy, hello from Calgary, interested to know if you've had support from the CBC radio, either regionally or nationally, in terms of features or interviews.
Yeah, great
Depending
question.
on where you go with this, I can add some flavor as well.
Yeah, it's a great question, Cindy. We have had good support from CBC Radio, both usually it's their regional radio stations that regional broadcasts that we tend to get a bit better pickup from on that side. So we've been invited on a few occasions to share information that has come across their desk, but occasionally nationally as well on that front.
One of the, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, and as Ryan had briefly mentioned throughout his presentation, during our State of Rural Canada exercise, we make a very targeted effort to get our regional information out to a lot of different audiences, whether it's media, whether it's um, um, members of political parties, and we have had some uptake as an organization from regional radio regarding the outcomes from the State of Rural Canada. That's a great question. Okay, let me see here. Justina, similar question to mine. Are you using specific approaches or frameworks to evaluate impacts? And she referenced a couple of examples there.
Yeah. So I think on this front, Justina, we've been using predominantly an absorptive capacity framework, looking at how do people receive information, how do they find it, and how do they use it for transformation, which has been essentially built into a number of those different frameworks that you listed in your question in the chat box. But we've been using absorptive capacity as kind of the key understone for understanding what's happening. And if you want more information, happy to share it on that front.
I believe the final question is from Stephen. For the one-pagers of the research summaries, have you thought about infographics or images instead of videos?
Yeah, it's a great question, Stephen, and you beat me to the punch. So for all of the videos and the accompanying summaries, there will be a series of infographics that have been created. It came out from a suggestion from community development practitioners who said, "Oh, I'd love to this be a infographic or a series of infographics." So they're literally just under press at the moment, and we're just waiting for the original contributors to send back their feedback. So we're hoping that those will be out early in the new year. But every video would have a series of infographics and a one-page summary to accompany it, recognizing that different people get attracted and get attached to different formats at the end of the day.
Excellent. Well, thanks everybody for coming today. Thank you once again for Ryan. I know we're at time. It's like we planned this perfectly. So I appreciate all of you for sticking around. And just a final plug, as we mentioned at a few points today, we are meeting in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, Labrador in June 2026. I just put the link there once again. In case you're able to join us, we'd love to have you. Call for Stories is open until January 31st, 2026. And registration will be open early in the new year. Stay tuned for more of these webinars. We're looking at February as the next time to do so. So please, I'm sure how you learned about this presentation today, you can be rest assured you'll hear about it through the same avenues early in the year. So that's it for us today. Thanks so much for coming, and stand by over the coming days for a certificate of your participation.